Out in the snow, behind a forgotten church, a worn-down trapper stumbles on something no man was meant to find: a frightened woman, a burlap sack, and a secret so heavy it brings the strongest to the ground. He thought he'd left the world behind, but now the storm's not just on the mountain, it's in the town, the law, and in every soul that dares to look away. What was hidden under that sack? And why did it change everything? Before we begin, send a quick wave in the comments. Tell me your city, your country, your vibe. It's amazing how stories like this echo across the world. Snow fell in lazy spirals as Elias McRae guided his horse down the familiar trail toward Three Pines. The late October flurries dusted his worn buckskin coat and settled in his graying beard. After weeks in the Wind River Highlands, his saddlebags hung heavy with beaver and marten pelts. Ready for trading at Jensen's General Store? The crunch of hooves on fresh snow echoed between the weathered buildings. Elias noted the unusual quiet. Shuttered windows lined the main street, thin wisps of wood smoke rising from stone chimneys into the pewter sky. Folk who normally called out greetings hurried past with barely a nod, shoulders hunched against more than just the cold. "Reckon them raid rumors got everyone spooked," Elias muttered to his horse. The animal's ears twitched in response. Word had spread of Crow warriors testing boundaries to the north, while whispers of railroad surveyors brought their own kind of tension. Change was coming to these mountains, whether folks wanted it or not. The old mission church loomed ahead, its white clapboard walls gone gray with neglect. 10 years since the last service, now it stood empty save for feral cats and forgotten hymn books. Elias usually passed it without a second glance, but today something made him rein up short. A sound, faint but distinct, drifted from the ramshackle woodshed behind the church. Could have been the wind, or maybe one of them wildcats. But something in that muffled noise raised the hair on his neck. Dismounting stiffly, Elias ground-tied his horse and approached the shed. His moccasins made no sound on the fresh snow. At the weathered door, he paused, listening. There it was again, a rustle of movement, too deliberate for any animal. The hinges creaked as he eased the door open. Weak light filtered through gaps in the wall boards, catching dust motes in pale shafts. Behind stacked firewood and empty crates, a shadow shifted. "Come on out," Elias said quietly. "I ain't meaning you harm." For a long moment, nothing moved. Then a young woman emerged from behind the crates, wrapped in a threadbare blanket. Her dark eyes held fear, but also fierce determination. She clutched a lumpy potato sack to her chest like it contained all the gold in California. Though her clothes were frontier-made, her features spoke of Shoshone blood. She couldn't have been more than 20 summers. Something in her face reminded him of his Sarah, gone these 12 years. That same mix of strength and vulnerability. "Please," she whispered, "don't look under the sack." Her voice carried the musical lilt of her people, though her English was clear. Elias hesitated. He'd learned long ago that some secrets were better left alone, but that same instinct that had stopped him at the church now wouldn't let him walk away. Moving slow, telegraph careful, he reached for the rough burlap. The young woman's fingers tightened, then slowly loosened. As he lifted the sack, his weathered hands trembled slightly. There, wrapped in what looked like an old shawl, lay a tiny infant. The baby's skin held the warm brown of its mother, but lighter, speaking to mixed parentage. Its face was pinched with cold and hunger, yet somehow peaceful in sleep. Elias dropped to his knees in the dusty shed, his heart clenching. He'd seen newborns before, but something about this child struck him to his core. Despite its dire circumstances, a sort of light seemed to radiate from its small form. The pure, untarnished spirit that only the very young possess. "How long you been out here?" he asked softly, not taking his eyes off the sleeping infant. 2 days, the woman answered. "The sisters at Fort Laramie said they'd help, but..." She trailed off, leaving the rest unsaid. Elias could guess well enough. A half-Indian child would find few welcome doors in these parts. The baby stirred, making a small sound between a whimper and a sigh. Without thinking, Elias reached out one rough finger to touch its cheek. The skin felt cool, too cool. Looking up at the mother's face, he saw both desperation and fierce love there. The same expression Sarah had worn all through that last terrible winter, trying to keep their little girl alive. His chest ached with memories he thought long buried. Elias gathered kindling from the stacked wood, his movements deliberate and gentle so as not to startle the young woman. Within minutes, a small fire crackled in the shed's ancient pot-bellied stove, casting welcome warmth into the shadowy space. "Name's Elias McCrae," he said, settling onto an overturned crate, "though some folks call me Bear Jaw." He gestured to the thick scar running along his jaw, legacy of an encounter that had earned him his nickname. The woman hesitated, then drew closer to the stove's heat. "I am Mary Windflower." She cradled the baby, who had begun to stir. "This is Samuel." "Fine name," Elias nodded. "Both of them." Mary's shoulders relaxed slightly as the warmth reached her. The marshal, he posted an ordinance. No Indians allowed inside town limits after sunset. Her voice carried both bitterness and fear. "Says we're a threat to peace, with all the raids happening north of here." Marshal Kershaw's always been more concerned with order than justice, Elias said quietly. He watched as Mary unwrapped Samuel enough to warm his tiny hands near the stove. The baby's fingers were like small pink shells against his mother's darker skin. "Samuel's father," Mary's voice caught. "He was a cavalry scout, James Porter. Said he loved me, promised marriage." She touched Samuel's cheek. "But when I told him about the baby, he disappeared. Posted to Fort Bridger, they said. Never heard from him again." Elias felt an old anger stir. He'd seen too many such promises broken. Too many lives shattered by men who took what they wanted and rode away. "My people cast me out," Mary continued. "Said I brought shame to the band. I've been hiding these past weeks, taking food where I can find it." She looked down at Samuel. "I keep him quiet during the day, but at night..." She trailed off, and Elias understood. A crying baby could mean discovery, and discovery could mean death for them both. The wind picked up outside, rattling the shed's loose boards. Night was coming, and with it, bitter cold. Elias made his decision. "I've got a cabin," he said. "Up Ghost Creek way, about 4 hours ride, remote. Nobody comes calling without invitation." He met Mary's wary gaze. "You'd be safe there, both of you." Mary studied him, weighing trust against desperation. Samuel whimpered softly, and she pressed him closer. "Why would you help us?" she asked. Elias touched the wedding band he still wore. "Had a wife once, Sarah. Lost her and our little girl to fever, 12 winters back." He cleared his throat. "Reckon maybe the good Lord's giving me a chance to do right by someone else's family." As dusk gathered, they made their preparations. Elias brought his mule around to the shed's back door, where shadows would hide their departure. He helped Mary mount his horse, then wrapped his spare blanket around her and Samuel. The baby stayed remarkably quiet, as if sensing the need for silence. They left Three Pines through the cottonwood grove behind the old mission, Elias leading the horse, while Mary held Samuel close. Snow began falling harder, thick flakes that would cover their tracks. The wind rose to a howl, driving the snow sideways and cutting through their clothes despite the blankets. "Not much further," Elias called out as they crossed Ghost Creek. The water ran black between ice-rimmed banks, and Mary's teeth chattered audibly. Samuel had started making small, distressed sounds, muffled against his mother's chest. It was nearly midnight when they finally reached the cabin. Elias had never been so glad to see its solid log walls and stone chimney. He hurried to light the fire while Mary sank into his one comfortable chair, exhausted but alert, still protecting her son. As warmth filled the cabin, Elias brought out jerky, dried apples, and the last of his cornbread. Mary ate carefully, one-handed, while Samuel nursed. The baby's color was better already. His tiny fingers curled trustingly around his mother's thumb. Looking at them in his cabin's firelight, Elias knew he'd made the right choice, even if it meant trouble with Kershaw and his deputies. Some things were worth the risk. Some promises needed to be kept, even if they weren't your own to begin with. "You're safe now," he said softly, adding another log to the fire. "Both of you." Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the cabin, for the first time in weeks, Mary Windflower allowed herself to truly rest, her son secure in her arms and the promise of sanctuary in her heart. Dawn crept over the mountain peaks, bringing with it a bone-chilling cold that seeped through the cabin's log walls. Elias had kept the fire stoked all night, watching over his unexpected guests from his perch on a wooden stool. Mary and Samuel slept fitfully on his narrow bed, wrapped in layers of beaver and bear pelts. As pale morning light filtered through the frost-covered windows, Elias began his daily routine. He added fresh logs to the dying embers and set his battered coffee pot to boil. The familiar aroma soon filled the small space, rousing Mary from her troubled sleep. "Got some provisions to share," Elias said softly, moving to his storage chest. He pulled out strips of dried venison and elk, along with a cloth-wrapped bundle of hard biscuits made with precious lard. "Ain't fancy, but it'll keep body and soul together." Mary sat up slowly, cradling Samuel. "You are kind, Mr. McCrae." "Just Elias," he corrected gently. He ladled coffee into a tin cup and offered it to her. As she reached for it, Samuel's wheezing caught his attention. The sound was harsh in the quiet cabin. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the baby. Mary hesitated, then carefully transferred Samuel to his arms. Elias held the infant with practiced ease, remembering another small life from long ago. He didn't like what he heard in the child's labored breathing. "Fever's rising," he murmured, touching Samuel's forehead. The baby's skin felt hot against his weathered palm. "Got some willow bark that might help, but..." He trailed off, worried eyes meeting Mary's. "He needs more than I can give him." Mary's face tightened with fear. "The Indian Agency doctor won't treat him. Already tried." Elias nodded grimly. "Reckon I know someone better." He returned Samuel to his mother's arms and moved to his herb shelf, selecting dried willow bark. As he prepared the tea, his mind worked through his options. "There's a woman in town, Aggie Dobbs. Used to be the midwife hereabouts before the new doctor came. She's got more healing knowledge in her little finger than that agency fellow has in his whole body." He showed Mary how to give Samuel small spoonfuls of the cooling tea, then began gathering supplies. "I'll need to fetch her. It's a fair ride, but my sled'll make better time than horseback in this snow." While Mary coaxed the medicine into Samuel, Elias stepped outside to prepare his dog sled. The morning air bit at his exposed skin as he harnessed his 4 dogs, checking their paws for ice buildup. He loaded extra blankets and emergency supplies, knowing winter travel could turn treacherous in moments. "I'll be back before nightfall," he promised Mary. "Keep the fire hot and give him willow tea every few hours. There's plenty of wood stacked by the door." The dogs pulled eagerly against their traces as Elias guided them down the snow-covered trail. The runners whispered over fresh powder, eating up the miles between his cabin and 3 Pines. The sun had reached its peak when he finally pulled up outside Aggie Dobbs' small cottage on the town's outskirts. Through the window, he could see her working at her quilting frame, her silver hair neat under its customary cap. She looked up at his knock, surprise crossing her lined face. "Elias McCrae," she said, opening the door. "Didn't expect to see you till spring thaw." "Need your help, Aggie," he said without preamble. "Got a sick baby up at my cabin?" Her keen eyes narrowed. "Tell me true now." Elias explained about finding Mary and Samuel, watching Aggie's expression shift from concern to determination. When he finished, she was already reaching for her medical bag. "Fool man," she said, but there was no heat in it. "You know what the town'll say harboring them?" "Reckon I do," Aggie checked her supplies with practiced efficiency. "I'm doing this for the baby's sake, not yours," she declared, though they both knew she'd never turned away anyone in need, regardless of color or circumstance. "Give me a moment to bank my fire." The return journey took longer, with Aggie wrapped in blankets on the sled while Elias broke trail. Darkness was falling when they finally reached the cabin, smoke rising straight from its chimney in the still, cold air. Mary started at their entrance, clutching Samuel protectively, but Aggie's presence filled the small space with calm authority, her movements sure as she set down her bag and unwrapped her shawl. "Well now," she said softly, approaching mother and child, "let's see what we can do for this little one." Her gentle hands and kind eyes spoke a language that needed no translation, bridging the gap between worlds with the timeless touch of a healer. Aggie moved with practiced efficiency around the cabin's small space, her medical bag yielding familiar tools and herbs. She warmed water on the stove, adding dried chamomile and elderflower to make a gentle tea. The familiar scent filled the cabin, bringing memories of countless sick rooms and birthing chambers to her mind. "First things first," she said, mixing ground mustard with warm water. "We'll make a poultice for his chest, help draw out whatever's causing that wheeze." Her weathered hands worked the mixture into a paste, spreading it on a clean cloth. "Mary, child, hold him just so while I place this." Mary adjusted Samuel against her shoulder, and the baby whimpered softly as Aggie applied the warm poultice. "There now, little one," Aggie murmured. "That'll ease your breathing some." Elias stood by the window, watching the three of them. The lamplight cast long shadows on the cabin walls as evening deepened outside. Snow had started falling again, thick flakes drifting past the frost-edged glass. "When did you last feed him proper?" Aggie asked, her tone gentle but direct. Mary's eyes dropped to her lap. "2 days ago. I haven't had enough milk since we started hiding." "Thought as much." Aggie reached into her bag and pulled out a small glass bottle. "Goat's milk, fresh from my own nanny. We'll mix it with some sugar water, make it easier for his belly to handle." As they worked together to feed Samuel, Mary's rigid posture gradually softened. Aggie's quiet competence seemed to draw out her story, like drawing poison from a wound. "My grandmother was our band's medicine woman," Mary said, watching Samuel take the mixture eagerly. "She taught me about plants, about healing, said I had the gift." A shadow crossed her face. "But the Indian agency wanted children who could translate. They took me to their school when I was 12. Elias moved closer to the fire, adding another log. The flames caught and crackled, casting warmth across the room. "That's where you learned English?" he asked quietly. Mary nodded. 5 years at the mission school. Then the agency hired me to translate for the cavalry when they came through." Her voice grew distant. "That's how I met Captain Orrin Silas." Aggie's hands stilled in their work. Her eyes sharpened, but she kept her voice neutral. "Tell me about him, child." "He was different from the others. Respectful. He'd bring books for the children at the mission, learn words in our language." Mary's fingers traced patterns on Samuel's blanket. "He said he loved me, said he'd marry me, make everything proper." Her voice caught. "Then I told him about the baby." "And he vanished," Elias said grimly. "Like morning mist," Mary confirmed. "Left for a patrol and never returned?" "When my people found out," she swallowed hard, "they said I dishonored the clan laws, cast me out." Aggie had gone very still, her face pale in the lamplight. "Mary," she said carefully, "when exactly was Samuel born?" "During the raids last winter, in the old mission church." Mary looked up, catching Aggie's expression. "Why?" "Because I was there," Aggie whispered. "I remember now, it was chaos. People running, smoke everywhere. Someone called me to the church." Her voice trailed off, heavy with memory. "A young Indian woman. alone and terrified. The baby came so fast I barely had time to warm water. Mary's eyes widened with recognition. You were the one? I was so afraid, in so much pain. I didn't know your name then, Aggie continued, but I had to record the birth. It was the law. She closed her eyes, remembering. Captain Silas? I knew him by reputation. He'd helped fund the mission school. When I heard rumors about him and a native girl, she opened her eyes, meeting Mary's gaze. I put his name in the ledger, official and proper, with 2 witnesses' signatures. The implications of this revelation fell heavy in the cabin's quiet. Elias straightened from his place by the fire. You're saying there's proof? He asked. Legal proof that Samuel is Captain Silas's son? Aggie nodded slowly. In the town records, clear as day, with the territorial seal and everything. Samuel Elias McCrae. That's how you named him, wasn't it, Mary? After my grandmother's father, Mary said softly. He was a great healer too. Samuel stirred in his mother's arms, his breathing already easier from the poultice. In the firelight, his features showed traces of both his parents, his mother's deep eyes, his father's strong chin. A child of 2 worlds with a legal claim to both. That ledger entry, Elias said thoughtfully, it changes things. Gives the boy rights under territorial law. Protection. Mary pulled Samuel closer, hope and fear warring in her expression. What does it mean? For him? It means, Aggie said firmly, that this child has a future, one that neither town nor territory can deny him. She reached out to touch Samuel's small hand, and we're going to make sure he lives to claim it. The cabin grew quiet as night settled in. Aggie had left hours ago, promising to return with more supplies when weather allowed. Only the soft pop of burning pine knots and Samuel's easier breathing broke the silence. Mary sat in the shadows, her face turned toward the small window where moonlight filtered through falling snow. Elias watched as tears began rolling down her cheeks, silent at first, then building to quiet sobs that shook her shoulders. She pressed one hand to her mouth, trying to muffle the sound. I'm sorry, she whispered, wiping roughly at her face. I thought I was done crying over this shame months ago. Ain't shame I see, Elias said quietly. Looks more like hope to me. Dangerous thing sometimes hope is. Mary nodded, gathering Samuel closer. The baby slept peacefully, his breathing finally unlabored thanks to Aggie's treatments. Both, she admitted. Shame for trusting so easily. Hope because... She touched Samuel's cheek. Because maybe now he has a chance. Long before dawn, Elias saddled his horse. The morning air bit sharp and cold, stars still bright overhead. He left Mary and Samuel sleeping, wrapped in warm buffalo robes near the banked fire. The ride into Three Pines took longer than usual, with snow drifting across the trail. The old mission stood silent in the gray morning light, its windows dark and empty. Elias tied his horse at a hitching post, snow crunching under his boots as he made his way to the back door. The lock was simple enough. He'd helped install it years ago when the mission still operated. Inside, dust motes danced in weak sunlight streaming through dirty windows. The birthing records room was small, tucked behind what had once been the sanctuary. Shelves lined the walls, holding leather-bound ledgers and loose papers. Elias found the most recent ledger on a bottom shelf, its cover partially blackened from some past fire. Several pages were torn or singed, but the territorial seal remained clear on the front. He carefully turned the pages until he found the entry Aggie had mentioned. There it was, Mary's name written in Aggie's neat hand, followed by Samuel's full name and date of birth. Below that, Captain Orrin Silas's signature sprawled across the witness line, the ink slightly smeared but legible. Elias's hands trembled slightly as he held the proof of Samuel's legitimacy. A floorboard creaked behind him. Well now, ain't this interesting? Marshal Kershaw's voice, carried clear across the room. Town's been wondering what brought Bearjaw McCrae down from his mountain. Elias turned slowly, keeping the ledger behind him. "Marshal, just checking some old records." Kershaw stepped closer, thumb hooked in his gun belt. "Records about that Indian woman folks seen you with? Or maybe about her half-breed brat?" "Careful with your words, Marshal," Elias said quietly. "You're speaking about a legal citizen of this territory." "Legal?" Kershaw's laugh held no humor. "That what you're trying to prove with them papers?" He gestured toward the ledger. "Town's changing, McCrae. Railroad's coming. Can't have squatters and vagrants cluttering up progress." "Mary Windflower ain't no vagrant," Elias said. "Neither's her son." "That's so." Kershaw's eyes narrowed. "Well, we'll see about that." By midday, fresh posters appeared on the town notice board and shop fronts. Elias saw them as he rode past. By order of Town Marshal Henry Kershaw, all persons of vagrant or mixed status found dwelling within town limits, without proper permits, will face arrest or removal. Effective immediate. The sun was setting when Elias finally returned to his cabin. Mary had soup warming on the stove, its savory smell filling the small space. Samuel lay wrapped in a clean blanket, cooing softly at the shadows cast by firelight. "I found it," Elias said, carefully laying the ledger on the table. "Your name's clear as day. Silas's signature, too." Mary touched the page with trembling fingers, tracing the letters of Samuel's name. "Then it's real? He has a right to be here?" "Yes," Elias said heavily, "but Kershaw's made things harder." He described the new ordinance, watching Mary's face pale. "We'll need to be more careful now. Town's getting dangerous for anyone they see as different." Mary lifted Samuel into her arms, holding him close. "What will we do?" "For now, you stay hidden here," Elias said firmly. "I've got supplies enough for winter, and Aggie knows how to reach us." He stoked the fire, adding another log. "Come spring, well, we'll figure something out." Outside, snow continued falling, covering their tracks, while inside the cabin, Mary prepared their supper with Samuel sleeping peacefully nearby, unaware of the growing threats to his future. The fire crackled in Aggie's small parlor as she poured steaming tea into 3 chipped cups. Outside, fresh snow blanketed 3 pines, muffling the usual morning sounds. Mary sat near the hearth, nursing Samuel while Elias paced the worn floorboards. "I can't let it stand," Elias said, his voice rough with frustration. "A man ought to face up to his responsibilities." Aggie settled into her rocking chair with a weary sigh. "That child's survival is enough of a miracle, Elias. Let it be." She gestured toward Mary and Samuel. "They're safe now, got a roof over their heads. Sometimes that's all the justice we get in this world." "It ain't right," Elias insisted. "Silas promised her marriage, then vanished like a coward when she needed him most. Now he's playing politician while his own son freezes in woodsheds." "The captain's stationed in Laramie now," Aggie said carefully, watching Elias over the rim of her teacup. "Word is he's running for state office. Means he's got powerful friends, Elias. Men who won't take kindly to old scandals coming to light." Elias stopped pacing, his shadow falling across the hearth. "Then maybe those friends ought to know what kind of man they're backing." Mary looked up from Samuel, her dark eyes worried. "Please don't risk yourself for us. We've caused enough trouble already." "No trouble you caused," Elias said softly. "This is about what's right." He moved to the window, staring out at the snow-covered street. "I've run from hard things before. Not this time." Aggie set down her cup with a sharp click. "If you're determined to be foolish, at least be careful about it. Mary and the baby can stay here with me while you're gone. My reputation's weathered worse storms than helping a mother and child." In the gray hours before dawn, Elias loaded his sled with supplies. He packed rifles wrapped in oiled cloth, ammunition, dried meat, and hard biscuits. The morning air bit sharp against his face as he worked, his breath forming clouds in the darkness. His mind drifted to another winter morning years ago, when he'd loaded a different sled with desperate urgency. His wife Sarah had been burning with fever, their little girl Rachel already gone 2 days before. He'd tried to reach the doctor in time, but the snow had been too deep, the trail too treacherous. By nightfall, he'd lost them both. After that, the mountains had seemed the only place big enough to hold his grief. He'd retreated to his cabin, trading pelts for supplies, speaking to folks only when necessary. Years had passed in a blur of seasons, each day much like the last until he'd heard that cry in the mission woodshed. Now, watching Mary tend to Samuel in Aggie's warm kitchen, something long frozen in his chest began to thaw. The boy deserved better than hiding, deserved his rightful name and place in the world. "I've left extra firewood stacked by the door," Elias told Aggie. "Should last till I return." "You just make sure you do return," Aggie replied sharply. "That child needs more than just a name to grow up strong." Mary stood in the doorway, Samuel bundled against her chest. "Be careful," she said softly. "The spirits of winter can be cruel to travelers." Elias nodded, touched by her concern. "I know the trails. Should make Laramie in 3 days if the weather holds." He adjusted the sled's harness, checking the bindings one final time. "Whatever happens, you stay with Aggie. She'll keep you safe." The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten as Elias set out. His snowshoes made soft, crunching sounds in the fresh powder as he broke trail, the loaded sled gliding smoothly behind him. The familiar weight of his rifle against his back gave some comfort as he thought about the confrontation ahead. Somewhere in Laramie, Captain Orrin Silas was probably sitting in a warm office, making grand speeches about progress and civilization. Elias pictured the man's face from Mary's description, clean-shaven, well-spoken, quick to smile. The kind of man who could promise a young woman the world, then leave her to face shame and exile alone. The sun rose fully as Elias reached the edge of the forest. Behind him, 3 pines disappeared into the morning mist, while ahead the trail stretched white and empty toward Laramie. He adjusted his snowshoes and pressed on, each step carrying him closer to a reckoning long overdue. The winter wind howled across the Wyoming plains as Elias approached Laramie. 2 days of hard travel had left him bone-weary, his clothes stiff with frozen sweat. He'd crossed 3 ice-choked creeks, nearly losing his sled at the last one when the ice cracked beneath him. But the thought of Samuel, wheezing in that woodshed, had driven him forward. Laramie sprawled before him now, its buildings dark shapes against the late afternoon sky. Smoke rose from dozens of chimneys, and the railroad depot buzzed with activity despite the bitter cold. Elias guided his sled toward the livery stable on the edge of town, where an old stable hand directed him to a vacant stall. "Grand Union's hosting some fancy political dinner tonight," the stable hand mentioned, helping Elias unload his gear. "Half the territory's big shots are there, celebrating that Captain Silas fellow. Reckon he's bound for the State House, way folks tell it." Elias nodded, saying nothing. He paid for a hot bath in the livery's back room, scrubbing away days of trail dirt. From his pack, he pulled out his old army jacket, worn but still presentable. He hadn't touched it in years, not since the war, but tonight it would serve as his passport into polite society. The Grand Union Hotel rose 4 stories above the street, its windows glowing with lamplight. Music and laughter drifted down from the second-floor banquet hall. Elias climbed the stairs slowly, one hand touching the ledger hidden inside his jacket. No one questioned his presence. The army coat and his purposeful stride carried him past the doorman. The banquet hall blazed with crystal chandeliers. Ladies in fine dresses moved between tables draped with white linen, while men in dark suits discussed politics and railroad contracts. Elias spotted Silas immediately at the head table, tall, clean-shaven, raising a glass in response to some toast. "To progress and civilization in our great territory," Silas proclaimed, his voice carrying across the room. Applause rippled through the crowd, Elias waited until the clapping died down. Then he moved forward, his boots silent on the carpeted floor. Conversations hushed as he approached the head table. Before anyone could stop him, he reached inside his jacket and laid the ledger in front of Silas. The room fell silent. "You left a woman in hiding," Elias said, his quiet voice carrying in the stillness, "and your son under a sack." Silas's face drained of color as he stared at the ledger. His hand trembled slightly as he set down his wine glass. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, trying to maintain his composure. "This is clearly some attempt at slander." "Mary Windflower," Elias cut in, speaking louder now. "Shoshone translator for the 7th Cavalry. Birth recorded by Agatha Dobbs, licensed midwife of 3 Pines. Your signature's right there on the page, Captain." A woman at the table gasped. Silas's political allies shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. The candidate himself sat frozen, staring at the familiar handwriting that condemned him. That's not possible," Silas stammered, but his denial lacked conviction. "I never—" "You promised her marriage," Elias continued relentlessly. "Then you disappeared when she needed you most, left her to face shame and exile while you built your fine political career." Whispers rippled through the crowd. Elias could see Silas's carefully constructed world crumbling around him. The man's shoulders sagged as he finally looked up to meet Elias's steady gaze. "Give me time," Silas said quietly, almost pleading. I can't just—" "Time?" Elias's voice hardened. "That boy's been freezing in woodsheds while you make speeches about progress. Your son, Captain. Your blood. How much more time should he wait?" The silence that followed was heavy with judgment. Elias could feel dozens of eyes on him, could sense the shock and disapproval radiating from Laramie's finest citizens. But he kept his gaze fixed on Silas, waiting. The captain's fingers traced his signature in the ledger, his political mask cracking to reveal something raw and human underneath. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Give me time," he repeated. "Please. I need to think." The blacksmith's bunkhouse creaked in the winter wind, its rough-hewn walls offering little comfort against the cold. Elias lay on a narrow cot, fully dressed, waiting for the heavy bootsteps of the law. He'd made his stand at the Grand Union, and now he reckoned there'd be consequences. His army coat hung on a peg, a reminder of another life, when justice seemed simpler. Dawn broke pale and thin across Laramie. Instead of a marshal's badge, Elias saw a young courier trudging through the snow toward the bunkhouse. The boy's cheeks were red from the cold as he handed over a sealed envelope. "From Captain Silas, sir?" the courier said, touching his cap before hurrying away. Elias broke the seal with stiff fingers. The letter inside was written in a careful hand, each word measured like ammunition. "Mr. McCrae, your words last night struck true. I cannot deny my shame, nor can I publicly claim what would destroy all I've built. But perhaps I can offer some measure of protection, if not justice. Enclosed, you'll find a deed to land near 3 Pines, donated anonymously to establish Windflower House. Use it as you see fit. I trust you understand both my cowardice and my attempt at mercy." A second paper showed the deed transfer, everything legal and proper. Elias folded both documents carefully, tucking them inside his coat. He'd hoped for more, but at least Mary and Samuel would have solid ground to stand on. The ride back to 3 Pines took him through bitter weather, the wind cutting like knives. But something colder waited at journey's end. He could feel it in the way people turned away as he rode past, in the whispers that followed him down the street. Aggie's cottage came into view, and his heart sank. One of her front windows was shattered, glass glittering in the snow beneath it. A rock lay among the shards, wrapped in a piece of paper with crude threats scrawled across it. "Trouble started yesterday," Aggie told him from her doorway, her voice tight with anger. "Folks claiming they saw smoke signals on the ridge. pure nonsense, but they're scared and looking for someone to blame? Mary's been at the old mission church since sundown praying for guidance. Elias wheeled his horse toward the church, but movement in the growing darkness caught his eye. A shadow slipped around the back of the weathered building. Then came the sharp smell of lamp oil and the orange flicker of flames. "Fire!" he shouted, spurring his mount forward. "Mary, get out!" Smoke billowed from the church's back room, where someone had doused the walls with oil and set them ablaze. The dry wood caught quickly, hungry flames climbing toward the roof. Inside he heard coughing and the sound of someone stumbling. "Mary!" Elias's voice cracked with desperation. The fire spread faster than seemed possible, fed by years of dust and decay. Orange light danced through the broken windows, casting demon shadows across the snow. The crack and roar of burning timber filled the air as the old mission church became a torch against the darkening sky. People began running from nearby houses, drawn by the commotion. Some carried buckets, others just stood and stared. The flames reached higher, a beacon of fear and hatred burning bright in the Wyoming night. This was more than just a fire. This was Three Pines making its judgment known, trying to burn away what it didn't want to face. The blaze threw harsh light on every face in the growing crowd, revealing what kind of justice some folks thought proper for a woman who dared cross the lines they'd drawn. Inside the burning church, Mary's fate hung in the balance, along with all hope of peace between two worlds. The fire roared louder, drowning out the gasps and murmurs of the townspeople, its hungry light painting everything in shades of orange and shadow. The church's timbers groaned under the assault of the flames, and somewhere in that inferno, a mother who had already lost too much faced yet another trial by fire. The night air filled with sparks and smoke, carrying with it the bitter scent of burning hope. Flames licked the night sky as the old mission church burned, its weathered boards crackling like kindling. Through the smoke and chaos, a massive figure emerged from the shadows, Bert Thompson, Aggie's cousin, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the inferno. The retired freighter had been hauling hay when he spotted the telltale column of smoke rising above Three Pines. "Someone in there!" he bellowed, charging toward the burning building. His voice carried over the roar of the flames, deep as thunder. Elias moved to follow, but Bert waved him back. "Stay put! I know this church better than my own bones. Helped build it 20 years ago." The big man disappeared into the smoke, his kerchief pulled up over his nose. Seconds stretched like hours as the townspeople watched, their faces orange in the firelight. Some held empty buckets, frozen in place. Others turned away, their silence speaking volumes about where they stood. A tremendous crash echoed from inside as part of the rear wall began to give way. Then Bert burst through the smoke, Mary clutched in one arm, Samuel protected against his chest. They collapsed into the snow, coughing and gasping. The baby wailed, a blessed sound that meant he was breathing. "Got him!" Bert wheezed, passing Samuel to Aggie's waiting arms. Found her near collapsed by the altar. Another minute and that back wall would have... He trailed off, helping Mary to her feet. The gathered crowd shifted uncomfortably, neither offering help nor speaking against what had happened. Their faces were masks in the firelight, some worried, others hard, with unspoken judgment. Marshall Kershaw stood at the edge of the group, writing in his notebook without meeting anyone's eyes. "Best get them inside," Aggie muttered to Elias. "My root cellar's dry and warm enough. Been storing winter supplies down there since October." They hurried Mary and Samuel through the darkness to Aggie's cottage, while behind them, the church continued to burn. The root cellar was cramped but secure, lined with shelves of preserved vegetables and dried herbs. Aggie arranged clean quilts on the packed earth floor, creating a makeshift bed. "You'll be safe here," she assured Mary, checking Samuel for any signs of smoke damage. "That boy's got lungs like a mountain lion. Crying's the best medicine right now." Hours passed. The fire died down, leaving only embers glowing in the night. Elias paced above the cellar, fury radiating from him like heat from a forge. When he finally descended the stairs, his face was set with grim determination. "We're leaving," he declared. "Tonight. I've got the sled ready, and we can be halfway to Montana territory by sunrise. No one will follow us that far north." But Mary, sitting cross-legged on the quilts with Samuel nursing at her breast, slowly shook her head. "No." "No?" Elias stopped short. "Mary, they tried to burn you alive. This town's made its feelings clear as day." "If we run now," Mary said softly, her voice hoarse from smoke but firm with conviction, "we teach Samuel the world's no place for him, that he must always hide, always flee." She stroked her son's dark hair, her eyes meeting Elias's. "I've been running since the day he was born. I'm done." The words hung in the cellar's close air. Elias stood frozen, struck by the quiet strength in her voice. His own experiences with loss and retreat played across his features as Mary's words found their mark. "Running kept us alive," she continued, "but it's not living. Samuel deserves more than a life spent looking over his shoulder. He deserves to stand in the sunlight, proud of who he is, all of who he is." Elias sank onto a nearby crate, the fight draining from his shoulders. "You're right," he admitted roughly. "Lord help me, you're right. But how do we protect him?" "Together," Aggie spoke up from the stairs, "with the law and that land deed on our side, let them see we won't be scared away, that we're neighbors, not enemies." Mary nodded, holding Samuel closer. "This is our home now. We'll build something here that's stronger than fear." The root cellar fell quiet except for Samuel's soft breathing. Above, the first gray light of dawn began to seep through the floorboards, while below, a mother's choice to stand firm rather than flee marked the beginning of a different kind of courage. Morning light filtered through Aggie's kitchen window as she poured steaming coffee into tin cups. Elias sat at her worn table, his fingers drumming against the wood while they planned. "The land deed's our foundation," Aggie said, settling into her chair. "But we need more. That boy needs protection under the law, not just a piece of paper saying where he can live." Elias wrapped his calloused hands around the warm cup. "What are you thinking?" "Adoption." Aggie's eyes were sharp and clear. "Make him yours, legal and proper. Samuel Elias McCrae has a solid ring to it, don't you think?" The suggestion hung in the air while Elias considered it. His expression softened as he thought of the small boy sleeping below in the root cellar with Mary. "Reverend Beeman's the town clerk," Aggie continued. "He's a fair man, even if he does get wrapped up in what others might think. And he respects military service, lost 2 brothers in the war." Elias nodded slowly. "Reckon it's worth trying. Better than leaving Samuel without a father's name at all." They finished their coffee in thoughtful silence, then set out through the crisp morning air toward the Reverend's office. The town was just waking up. Shopkeepers sweeping their boardwalks, the blacksmith's forge beginning to glow. Reverend Beeman's office occupied a small room behind the new Presbyterian church. They found him at his desk, wire-rimmed spectacles perched on his nose as he sorted through parish records. "Mr. McCrae, Mrs. Dobbs," he greeted them, setting down his pen. "What brings you here so early?" Elias placed the land deed on the desk. "Need to register some papers, Reverend." And he hesitated, then squared his shoulders. "Need to record an adoption." The Reverend's eyebrows rose as Elias explained the situation. His weathered face creased with concern as he studied the deed, then looked up at them both. "This is unusual," he said carefully. "The child's heritage. Some might object." "Some might," Aggie agreed, her voice firm. "But the law's the law, and Elias here served his country faithful. 8 years in the cavalry. Surely a man who defended this territory has the right to raise a son." Reverend Beeman removed his spectacles, polishing them with a handkerchief while he thought. You served under Colonel Harrison, didn't you, McCrae? During the Apache campaigns? Yes, sir, 3rd Regiment. The Reverend nodded slowly. Lost my brothers James and William at Shiloh. Good men, like yourself. He replaced his spectacles and pulled out a thick ledger. What is the boy's name? Samuel Elias McCrae, Elias said, his voice rough with emotion. The scratch of the Reverend's pen filled the small office as he made the entry. When he finished, he sprinkled sand over the wet ink and blew it clean. There, he said, pushing the ledger forward for Elias to sign. May God guide you in raising him right. While Elias took care of the final details, Aggie slipped away on another mission. She found Miss Clara, the new schoolmarm, arranging books in the one-room schoolhouse. Got a minute to talk about a future student? Aggie asked, closing the door behind her. Miss Clara was young, but had kind eyes, and a reputation for treating all children equally. She listened intently as Aggie explained about Samuel, then smiled. Every child deserves an education, Mrs. Dobbs. When he's ready, he'll have a desk here like any other. Back at her cottage, Elias sat at the kitchen table with paper and pen. His letter to Captain Silas was brief, but clear. Sir, enclosed is the certificate of adoption for Samuel Elias McCrae. He's got a name now. It won't be yours. E. McCrae. He sealed the envelope and handed it to Aggie for posting. Then he descended the cellar stairs to where Mary sat with Samuel, sunlight streaming through the high window catching dust motes in its beam. It's done, he said simply, holding out the official paper. He's my son now by law. Mary took the document with trembling hands, reading the formal script that declared Samuel Elias McCrae the legal son of Elias McCrae. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she traced her finger over her baby's new name. Thank you, she whispered, holding Samuel close. The infant gurgled, reaching up to pat her wet cheek with his tiny hand. The first real snow of winter blanketed Elias's cabin in deep drifts, transforming the rough-hewn logs into something almost magical. Inside, warmth from the stone fireplace filled every corner while Mary stirred a pot of rabbit stew. Samuel bundled snugly in a cradleboard nearby. Elias stomped snow from his boots at the door, bringing in an armload of split wood. Storm's settling in proper now, he said, stacking the logs by the hearth. Might have us 3 feet by morning. Mary ladled stew into wooden bowls. Good thing we got the root cellar stocked last week. She smiled, watching Samuel wave his tiny fists at the firelight dancing on the ceiling. The land deed from Captain Silas had proved more valuable than expected. It included not just the cabin site, but 40 acres stretching down to the creek bottom. Enough land to build something lasting, Mary had said, enough room to grow. As December deepened into January, changes came slowly but surely. One morning, they found a fresh apple pie on the porch steps, still warm under its cloth covering. A week later, Bert the freighter happened by. With an extra load of firewood he claimed he couldn't store. Might as well leave it here, he'd said gruffly, not meeting their eyes. Save me the trouble of hauling it back. Even the town's children started appearing at the cabin's edge, drawn by curiosity about the Indian lady who knew about plants and healing. Mary would smile and show them which pine needles made the best tea, or how to identify wintergreen berries under the snow. One particularly cold afternoon, Miss Clara arrived with her younger sister, both suffering from winter cough. Mary brewed them a special tea of wild cherry bark and honey, sharing stories of her grandmother's remedies while it steeped. You have such knowledge, Clara said, sipping the soothing drink. Would you consider teaching a class on herbal medicine at the school? Just one afternoon a week? Mary's hands stilled on her mortar and pestle. Some parents might object. Let them, Clara replied firmly. Knowledge is knowledge, no matter its source. Not everyone was won over, of course. Marshal Kershaw still watched the cabin with suspicious eyes whenever he rode past. Mrs. Whitmore, the banker's wife, would cross the street rather than share a boardwalk with Mary. and some men still spat tobacco juice when Elias walked by, muttering about Indian lovers under their breath. But the harsh edges of hatred were slowly wearing smooth, like river stones in spring flood. One February morning, Elias stood studying the old barn that sagged at the edge of their property. Its roof needed replacing, the walls wanted reinforcing, but the bones were solid. Mary came to stand beside him, Samuel wrapped warm against her chest. "What do you see?" she asked quietly. Elias squinted at the structure. A lot of work needed, but she could be sound again with enough effort. "I was thinking," Mary said, choosing her words carefully, "there might be others like me someday. People caught between two worlds, needing shelter until they find their feet." Elias turned to look at her, understanding dawning in his eyes. "A place of refuge?" She nodded. "The deed says we can use the land as we see fit, and you're good with your hands. I've watched you repair this cabin all winter." "Might need help with a project that size," Elias mused, already mentally cataloging lumber requirements. As if in answer, Bert's wagon creaked up the snow-packed trail the next day, loaded with salvaged boards from a torn-down storeroom. "Heard you might be fixing up that old barn," he said, helping Elias unload. "Shame to let good lumber go to waste." Word spread quietly through town about the barn project. Soon, others began appearing with offerings. A box of nails here, a bundle of shingles there. Even Marshal Kershaw grudgingly contributed some rope and pulleys left over from the jail repair. The old barn gradually straightened under their combined efforts. Mary would watch from the cabin door as Elias worked alongside whoever showed up to help, their breath frosting in the winter air as they hauled beams and secured rafters. "Things are changing," she said one evening as they sat by the fire, Samuel sleeping peacefully in his cradle. "Slowly, like spring thaw, but changing all the same." Elias nodded, watching the flames dance. "Reckon people just needed time to see past their fears. See you for who you really are." Outside, snow continued falling softly, covering the newly repaired barn roof in a clean white blanket. Inside, the cabin glowed with warmth and hope, a beacon in the winter night for anyone who might need its light. Snow drifted past the cabin windows like falling stars on Christmas Eve, each flake catching the golden glow from within. Mary sat in her rocking chair near the hearth, making the final stitches on a patchwork quilt she'd been crafting in secret moments over the past weeks. Her needle glinted in the firelight as she wove the last thread through, securing the edges with practiced care. In the center of the quilt, transformed by careful washing and precise cutting, lay the very potato sack that had once hidden Samuel from sight. Mary had stitched it into a star pattern, surrounding it with squares of calico and muslin donated by Aggie. Each piece told a story: scraps from Samuel's first proper baby gown, a strip from one of Elias's old shirts, even a small length of ribbon from Miss Clara's Christmas bonnet. The cabin smelled of sage and wild onions, mingling with the rich aroma of rabbit stew bubbling in the iron pot. Elias stood at the rough-hewn table, cutting thick slices of fresh cornbread while humming an old hymn under his breath. Samuel lay nearby in his cradle, cooing at the shadows dancing on the log walls. A knock at the door announced Bert and Aggie's arrival, their arms laden with pine boughs and dried berries for decoration. "Mercy, but it's cold enough to freeze the whiskers off a buffalo out there," Aggie declared, stamping snow from her boots. Bert carried in a small bundle wrapped in brown paper. "Found these at Thompson's store," he said gruffly, setting down what turned out to be candy sticks striped red and white. "Thought the little one might like to see them, even if he's too young for tasting." They gathered around the table, steam rising from bowls of stew thick with carrots and potatoes. Bert said grace, his weathered hands clasped tightly as he thanked the Lord for shelter, friendship, and the miracle of new beginnings. As they ate, stories flowed as freely as the coffee. Aggie recalled Christmases from her childhood in Ohio when her mother would hang apples on the tree branches, Bert spoke of his years driving freight wagons through winter storms, guided only by faith and the smell of pine forests. Mary shared memories of winter ceremonies with her people, the sacred songs that welcomed the returning sun. After the meal, while Aggie helped Mary clear the dishes, Elias retrieved his mother's Bible from its shelf. The leather binding was worn smooth from years of handling, its pages soft at the corners. He settled into his chair, adjusting the lamp to better see the well-loved words. "Reckon it's time for the Christmas story," he said softly, opening to the Gospel of Luke. Samuel, as if sensing the moment's importance, grew quiet in his cradle. Elias's deep voice filled the cabin as he read of Caesar's decree and Joseph's journey to Bethlehem. When he reached the words about the newborn Jesus being wrapped in swaddling clothes and laid in a manger, his voice caught unexpectedly. The parallel struck him forcefully. Another child wrapped and hidden, not in a manger, but in a simple sack, waiting to be found. Mary rose quietly and lifted Samuel from his cradle. With gentle hands, she wrapped him in the newly finished quilt, the transformed potato sack at its heart, now cradling him properly for the first time. "He was hidden," she whispered, touching the rough-turned smooth fabric at the quilt's center, "but not forgotten. Not by his mother's heart, not by God's grace, and not by the good souls who chose to see him." Aggie wiped tears from her eyes with her apron corner. Bert cleared his throat roughly, suddenly very interested in stoking the fire. Elias closed the Bible slowly, one hand resting on its worn cover as he watched Mary and Samuel in the lamplight. The quilt wrapped around them both now, no longer a desperate means of concealment, but a testament to survival, to love that persisted despite all odds. Every stitch spoke of protection, every patch told of community slowly knitting itself back together. At its heart, the humble sack that once hid a child in fear now proclaimed his right to exist in the open, cherished and claimed. Outside, snow continued falling, adding another layer of white to the drifts around the cabin. Inside, warmth and fellowship filled every corner as surely as the lamplight, transforming what was once a place of exile into a true home, blessed by the presence of those who had chosen to make room in their hearts for love's unexpected arrivals. The mountain snows melted into rushing streams, and spring painted the hills with tender green shoots. Mud squelched beneath boots on Three Pines' wooden sidewalks as townspeople emerged from winter's long isolation. Miss Clara, her hair neatly pinned beneath her blue bonnet, tacked a notice to the schoolhouse door one crisp morning. The paper, written in her precise hand, announced, "Education available to all children of Three Pines and surrounding territories, regardless of heritage or circumstance." She stood back, chin lifted proudly, as mothers gathered to read her words. That same week, Reverend Beeman visited Windflower House, where Elias and Bert had finished raising the barn's new roof. The Reverend removed his hat, turning it nervously in his hands as he spoke. "The Lord's house should have no walls of prejudice," he declared, then offered to hold monthly services in the renovated space. Mary, working in her herb garden nearby, straightened slowly, hope blooming in her chest like the spring flowers around her feet. A letter arrived by stagecoach, bearing Captain Silas's official seal. Elias read it alone on the porch, his face growing stern in the afternoon light. The captain's elegant script expressed gratitude for Elias's intervention and promised regular donations to support the mission's work with mixed heritage children. The final lines requested no further correspondence, a door closing firmly, but with dignity. Elias stood silently, struck a match, and watched the paper curl and blacken in the spring breeze until only ashes remained. That evening, as shadows lengthened across the cabin floor, Samuel pulled himself up against a chair. Mary gasped softly, her mending forgotten in her lap. The child, now 11 months old, wobbled on sturdy legs, his dark eyes bright with determination. "Look there," Elias whispered, not daring to move from where he sat. Samuel released the chair and stood alone for a heartbeat. Then, with arms outstretched, he took one tentative step toward his mother. Another step followed, then another. 5 precious steps carried him across the plank floor before he tumbled safely into Mary's waiting arms. "Did you see?" Aggie cried from her place by the hearth. "Did you see what that boy just did?" Tears streamed down Mary's cheeks as she gathered Samuel close. "Thank you, Creator," she whispered in her native tongue. Then in English, "Thank you, God." Her words carried the weight of more than just this moment. They encompassed every trial and triumph that had led to her son walking freely, claimed, and celebrated across the floor of a place he could truly call home. Elias's deep laugh filled the cabin as Samuel, encouraged by their reactions, immediately began pulling himself up for another attempt. Spring's promise of new beginnings had never felt more real than in those first wobbling steps toward tomorrow. Summer stretched golden across the Wyoming territory, blessing Three Pines with long, warm days. The Windflower House stood proudly at the edge of town, its fresh-painted walls and sturdy beams a testament to countless hours of community labor. Where once stood a weathered barn, now rose a place of learning, healing, and hope. Inside the main room, Mary arranged dried herbs in neat bundles along the rafters. Yarrow, sage, and wild mint filled the air with their healing scents. Twice a week, she gathered with local women to share the wisdom of both her native upbringing and frontier experience. Even Mrs. Peterson, who once crossed the street to avoid Mary's path, now sat attentively among the students, carefully noting which plants could ease her grandson's coughing fits. "The Creator gives us medicine in every season," Mary explained, her quiet voice carrying authority earned through years of study with her grandmother. "We must simply learn to see with grateful eyes." In another corner, Miss Clara's voice rang clear as she guided 3 young boys through their letters. Her small classroom had grown from just 2 students to nearly a dozen, including children from the reservation and surrounding homesteads. The scratch of chalk on slate mingled with the rhythm of recited words. Outside in the workshop, Elias showed 16-year-old Tommy Banks how to repair a broken wagon wheel. The boy had arrived 3 months ago, orphaned and angry, but found purpose in working with his hands. 2 other boys, one white, one Arapaho, cleaned harnesses nearby, their easy friendship a sight that would have seemed impossible just seasons ago. Samuel, now nearly 2 years old, toddled between the groups, equally at home with everyone. His dark curls caught the sunlight as he carried small tools to Elias, or helped Mary sort her herbs in his own special way. The sound of his laughter had become as natural as birdsong to the house. Late that afternoon, as the sun began its slow descent behind the Wind River peaks, a stranger's wagon creaked to a stop at the front gate. The traveler, dust-covered from the trail, tilted his head to read the wooden sign carved into the archway. The words, weathered but clear, declared, "Don't look under the sack." The man scratched his beard, puzzled. "Now that's a peculiar welcome," he called out to Elias, who was kneeling in the garden with Samuel. "What's it supposed to mean?" Elias looked up, squinting against the golden light. A slow smile spread beneath his graying beard as he watched Samuel carefully placing bean seeds in the furrows they'd made together. The boy's small hands worked with surprising gentleness, each seed a treasure to be tucked safely into the earth. "Well, stranger," Elias replied, his voice warm with amusement, "it means you never know what treasure God's hiding under hardship." He brushed soil from his pants and stood, stretching his back. Sometimes the things folks try hardest to hide turn out to be blessings in disguise. The traveler nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his tired eyes as he took in the scene before him. The mixed group of children playing freely, the herbs drying on the porch, the sound of women's laughter drifting through open windows. Here was a place where barriers fell away, where what others might hide was instead celebrated. "Reckon that's worth remembering," the man said softly, touching his hat brim in respect before clicking to his horses. As the wagon rolled away, Elias knelt once more beside his son. Samuel's face showed the same focused determination he'd inherited from his mother, his small fingers carefully covering each seed with soil. The setting sun painted the mountains in shades of purple and gold, while chimney smoke from 3 pines rose straight and peaceful into the evening sky. Elias watched his boy work, remembering that cold day in the mission woodshed when he'd lifted a rough potato sack to find a treasure beyond measuring. What had been hidden in fear was now planted firmly in love, growing strong and true in the light of day. Every seed Samuel buried in the warm earth was a promise of tomorrow, a testament to grace hidden in unexpected places. Thanks for spending a moment here with me. If this story touched you, let's keep this connection going. Hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.